Hola, ¿cómo estás? Yo estoy muy bien. Looking forward to getting started with you on week número ocho, semana ocho. We're going to start off 8.1 instruction one with a quick review of some of the material from last week, since that's going to play a really important part in what we do this week, and also talk about some pronunciation practice. So I want to give you a quick recap of the verb ser with adjectives and also tengo and tiene with nouns, because those are what we studied last week. So to get started here, we're going to look at a few different slides, and we learned last week the question, ¿Cómo eres? And ¿Cómo eres, as you might recall, is a really important power question for this chapter. It asks, what are you like? All right, so we're going to come back and spend some time on that this week. Remember, in this question, ¿Cómo eres? Eres is a form of the verb ser, which we spent a lot of time studying so far. All right, ser we know is used to identify a person and to say where that person is from. We learned that in our first chapter. But we also saw last week ser has other uses as well. It's used to describe what a person looks like, in other words, their appearance, and also a person's personality, kind of what they're like in terms of interesting, boring, serious, funny. It's used both ways to describe. So in other words, we use ser to say things like, I'm funny and I'm tall. You're kind and short. She's athletic and young. He's shy and old. These are all examples of ways we would use ser to describe our appearances and also our personalities. In Spanish, soy alto y serio. I'm tall and serious. Juan es bajo y artístico. He's short and artistic. Ustedes son inteligentes y guapos. You're all intelligent and good looking. Sara y Maria son altas y tímidas. Sara and Maria are tall and shy. So you see the form of ser changes depending on the subject. It's soy because of yo. It's es because of Juan. Son because of ustedes. So we know those things change. But also if you look at the words, you see those are adjectives used to describe a person's appearance and their personality. So that's what we use ser for. We learned last week. Just a quick reminder, how do we conjugate ser? Soy, eres, es. Somos, sois, y son. A really, really, really important verb. And we know from our first few weeks that ser means to be, along with the forms here again. I am, you are, he or she is, you are formal. And on the plural side, we are. In Spain, they would say sois for you guys are, or all of you are. Son is they are, or also can be all of you are. So those are my forms of ser. So coming back to that question, ¿Cómo eres? What are you like? We learned last week lots of vocabulary words. Words ocho all the way to 40, 8 all the way to 40 were adjectives used to describe somebody's personality, but also somebody's appearance. So ocho to 26, 8 to 26 were all personalities. 27 to 40 were all appearances. And we're going to practice those a little bit in this first set to make sure you're really strong on your vocabulary. All right, now when we use that, we talked about last week how to describe. So 2 pictures on the screen. I'm going to describe what I'm like, so I'm going to say soy, and then we'll talk about Santiago, what he's like. So we learned last week when you describe, we say things like soy amable, estudioso, inteligente, organizado, trabajador y cómico. Those all describe my personality. Soy alto y joven describe my physical appearance. All right. So I chose soy for that because I'm talking about myself. So I am and I am. Now, if I were to look at Santiago and describe him, I've got to change my form of the verb over to es, because Santiago is conjugated with ser as the form of es. So when we talk about Santiago, Santiago es inteligente, obstinado, muy perezoso, y muy travieso. All right, those describe Santiago very well. And then Santiago es bajo, grande y guapo. So that's how I can use forms of ser along with my vocabulary words from this chapter to describe, and we'll be doing a lot of that over the next week or two as we work through this chapter even more. All right. And then we also learned last week how to describe hair. All right. And the verb tener is used to talk with nouns, because when you talk about hair, you're talking about a noun, because hair is a noun. So when you're describing my hair, I would say tengo. If I'm talking about his hair, él tiene, or her hair, ella tiene. All right. So depending on which one you want to say. And when we describe hair, we learned 3 different words last week. So pelo rubio, pelo castaño, and pelo negro. 3 different ways to describe hair. So yo tengo el pelo castaño. If I'm talking about my friend, él tiene el pelo rubio. And if I'm talking about my other friend, maybe I would say, ella tiene el pelo negro. So we can use tengo or tiene to describe hair, and we use forms of ser with adjectives to describe personality and also your appearance. So that was what we did last week. And again, if I talk about my hair a little bit, I could say in my case, tengo el pelo corto y castaño. Santiago tiene el pelo largo y amarillo. Tengo because I'm talking about myself. Tiene because now we're talking about Santiago. All right. Then also last week, we learned quite a bit about articles. We learned that Spanish, there are 4 ways to say the word the. Could be el, la, los, or las. Again, all 4 ways mean the. How do you know? Well, which one you use depends on the noun that it precedes. Masculine or feminine, in singular or plural. We learned last week that most nouns that end in O are masculine. Most nouns that end in A are feminine. And then if it's plural, it'll have an OS or an AS. So el chico or la chica, los chicos y las chicas. Then also last week we learned something called indefinite articles, a, an, or some. All right, un is masculine singular, una singular feminine, unos masculine and plural, and then unas feminine and plural. So which one you use, again, depends on the noun that precedes it. Masculine, feminine, singular, or plural. So with the word chico, why is it un? Well, because it's singular and it's masculine, a boy. Una chica, because it's feminine and singular, a girl. Unos chicos, why is that unos? Well, because chicos is plural and masculine, and then chicas is feminine and plural, so it'd have to be unas. So we learned about those articles last week. Then we also learned about singular and plural, and we know that to make a noun plural, all we have to do is add the word es if the noun ends in a vowel. So el amigo, the friend, changes to los amigos to make it plural. Now we add an es if the noun ends in a consonant. So la mujer ends in an R. To make that plural, to go from the woman to women, it would be las mujeres. Then we also saw last week if a word ends in a Z, we've got to change the Z to a C and then add an es. So el lápiz is the pencil. To make it plural, los lápices. All right, so to get started in this first set, we're going to work a little bit on just some review from last week to work on the articles and to also work on description. And then we're going to finish this first set today working on some pronunciation, working on some letters that are still giving us a little bit of a trouble when we're submitting our videos. So we'll get started with some warm-up and then move on to some new material once you get down to instruction 2. Buena suerte. Hasta luego.